Dear listeners, a new day and a new story to discuss. Today I'm going to tell you a story that interests me. Listen and write down what you think about this situation. I'm interested in your opinions. You know, you never really expect your life to change while sitting in a dimly lit bar on a Thursday night. There I was with Felix, my business partner and only real friend, clinking glasses over what should have been a victory drink. That's when the noise changed, sharper, sudden. It pricked at me. What's going on over there? Felix asked, nodding towards the commotion. No clue, I replied, my eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on her. A blonde woman, her laughter too loud, a spectacle. She was surrounded by a bunch of burly men, each one feeding off her energy like parasites. Something about her was disturbingly familiar. She was tipsy, yes, dangerously so, but it was her hair, that long blonde cascade, and the rose tattoo peeking over her shoulder, just like Ellen's. Ellen, my wife, supposed to be in Houston on a business trip. That couldn't be her, could it? The thought lodged itself like a splinter in my mind. It gnawed at me, even as I tried to laugh it off with Felix. But my laughter was hollow, and I think he noticed. Hey, Bob, you all right? Felix's voice cut through the haze of my brewing storm. Yeah, it's me. I'm Bob, I said, snapping back to the moment. I'm fine. But fine was the last thing I was. There was a tightness in my chest that felt like betrayal, tightening with each laugh that echoed from that woman's table. I watched her rise, her movements too familiar, her laughter a piercing reminder of Ellen. As she passed by with her entourage, her eyes met mine, dark blue, just like Ellen's when she's had one too many. They flashed a knowing glint before she turned away, her laughter trailing behind her like a cloak. The resemblance was uncanny. Isn't Ellen supposed to be in Houston? Felix's question was a whisper, almost lost in the noise. Yeah, she is, I confirmed, my voice steady despite the storm inside. But there's something about this blonde that's unsettling. Hard to explain. Just then, the waitress approached, snapping me out of my daze. We ordered 2 more beers. I stopped her before she could leave. But before you go, can you tell me anything about that blonde? Oh, her. The waitress paused, eyeing me with a mix of caution and curiosity. I've seen her around here a few times, always surrounded by a bunch of guys you don't want to get mixed up with. I was just curious, I told her, but as Felix and I called it a night, the seed of doubt planted earlier began to sprout. A cold sweat coated my skin as I made my way to my room. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I dialed Ellen's number, each ring echoing like a drumbeat of impending doom. She didn't answer. Each call went straight to voicemail, a deviation from her usual habit of keeping her phone close. Trying the hotel where she was staying, I was told she had checked out early that morning. Not unusual for Ellen to change plans, but she always informed me. The night was long, the room colder than usual. I lay there, the TV flickering shadows across the room, thinking, calculating. If that was Ellen at the bar, then who was in Houston? What was she really doing? And if it wasn't her, then why did every laugh, every gesture from that blonde slice through me like a betrayal? I knew then what I had to do. By the time dawn cracked through the blinds, my mind was made up. I was going to find out the truth, no matter the cost. Because betrayal, if that's what it was, would not stand. Not in my life. Not without consequences. You see, nothing in life is truly coincidental, is it? That night at the bar, the image of that blonde woman, it clawed at my mind all night. The next morning, I was back in my office, but my thoughts were a tangled mess, sticky and persistent. Ellen was supposed to be in Houston, not making a spectacle of herself in a bar back home. Every logical explanation failed to quench the fire of suspicion that had taken hold of me. I needed answers. Felix called around noon. Hey, how are you holding up, man? There was a wariness in his voice, like he knew too well the storm brewing inside me. Been better, I admitted, my fingers drumming a nervous beat on the desk. Listen, about last night? That blonde, Felix cut in, his tone low. She looked a lot like Ellen. I paused, a cold laugh escaping me. Yeah, I noticed. Too much like Ellen. My words felt like shards of glass, sharp and dangerous. Maybe it's worth checking out, Felix suggested. Could be nothing, but if it's something? I finished for him, my heart racing at the thought. Yeah. Look, just be careful, all right? Don't do anything drastic. Drastic. The word hung between us, a warning, or perhaps a challenge. After we hung up, the idea fermented in my mind. I wasn't just going to sit back and watch my life unravel based on suspicions. I needed concrete proof. I decided to make a call to Ellen's hotel in Houston, posing as her concerned husband. I'm trying to reach my wife. She hasn't checked in with me, I lied smoothly. There was a pause, then the reply came, cutting deep. Sir, she checked out yesterday morning. Are you sure? My voice was calm, but my grip on the phone was white-knuckled. Could there be a mistake? No mistake, sir. There it was. The confirmation I dreaded but expected. Ellen had lied. She wasn't in Houston. She hadn't been since yesterday. She could very well have been the woman at the bar. The implications of her deceit were like a noose tightening around my neck. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. The betrayal was palpable, thick in the air around me like a toxic mist. Was our marriage a lie? What else was Ellen hiding? The rest of the day passed in a blur of anger and plotting. I made a few calls, gathered some facts, and pieced together Ellen's movements over the past week. Each piece fit perfectly in the worst way possible. That evening, as I sat alone in our home, the silence was oppressive, suffocating. I poured myself a drink, the ice clinking mockingly in the glass. My reflection stared back at me from the dark window. What had I become? The phone rang, jarring me from my thoughts. It was Ellen. Hi, honey, just wanted to check in. How are you? How am I? The question was a slap in the face. Fine, I lied, my voice tight. And you? How's Houston? Busy as always, she replied, her voice breezy, unaware of the storm she'd stirred. That's good to hear, I managed to say, my grip on the phone tightening. We'll talk soon. Love you, she said, and before I could respond, she hung up. Love you. The words echoed mockingly in my mind. I set the phone down slowly. There was no going back now. I would find out everything. Every lie, every deceit. Ellen had made a fool of me for the last time. I turned off the lights and headed to bed, but sleep was a stranger that night. Revenge, however, kept me company, whispering darkly of payback and justice. Tomorrow, I would start pulling at the threads of Ellen's lies. Let her world unravel as mine had. Because betrayal? It demands retribution, and I was all too willing to deliver it. You might think you know someone, right? You share a bed, a life, you weave your dreams together, or so you believe. Then one day, the veil lifts, and you see the truth in the harsh light of betrayal. It cuts deeper than a knife, believe me. After that night, after Ellen's far too cheerful check-in call, nothing was the same. I couldn't look at our shared spaces without suspicion creeping in, couldn't glance at her picture without feeling that twist in my gut. Everything seemed a lie. The next morning, I started digging. I called her office under the pretense of planning a surprise party, something sweet, something a loving husband would do. Oh, Mrs. Carson left early yesterday, her assistant informed me, a cheerful lilt in her voice that grated on my nerves. Back home, I believe. Back home, I echoed, the words sour in my mouth. Home to what? Not to me, clearly. The deceit was sprawling, a web with Ellen at the center, and I, the ensnared, foolish fly. Later that day, I drove around town, a pit forming in my stomach. I wasn't just hunting for proof. I was stalking the ghost of my wife's fidelity, a specter that seemed increasingly transparent. That evening, I found myself outside the same bar from the other night. The neon lights mocked me, flickering like the remnants of my trust in her. I sat there, at the bar, nursing a drink, scanning the crowd. No sign of the blonde, no sign of Ellen. But the bartender recognized me. "Back again, huh?" he asked, polishing a glass. "Just thinking," I replied, my voice hollow. "Anything interesting?" he prodded, perhaps sensing my unrest. "Just wondering about last time I was here." "That group, the woman who looked like she was having the time of her life?" He nodded, setting the glass down. "Yeah, they're regulars, sort of. Always a different crowd, though." Regulars. The word hung in the air. Was Ellen a regular too? The thought was like acid on my skin. I pressed on, desperate for any crumb of truth. "Interesting folks, I guess." "You could say that," he shrugged, his eyes narrowing slightly. "They keep to themselves. Quite the party animals, though." I left the bar with more questions than answers, the night air doing nothing to cool my heated thoughts. The drive home was a blur. The house was dark when I arrived, silent and accusing. I couldn't shake the image of Ellen with others, laughing, touching. It burned. I went through our things, her things. Each item I touched felt tainted, foreign. Was I even looking for answers anymore, or was I just trying to gauge the depth of her betrayal? The night dragged on, each tick of the clock a reminder of the distance between us. Then her text came, late, too late, sorry, long day. "Miss you. Zoxo." "Miss you. Zoxo." The words were a slap. I replied with a cold, "Okay," nothing more. What was there to say? That I knew? That our vows meant nothing to her now? I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The trust we'd built, the years together, it all felt like a castle built on sand. My love the tide, receding fast, leaving nothing but debris. And amidst that debris, I plotted. Revenge, they say, is a dish best served cold. Well, my plans were Arctic. Ellen would come home eventually, and when she did, I would be ready. Ready to confront, ready to shatter the facade she'd been living behind. But first, I needed undeniable proof. Proof that wouldn't just shake her, but rock the very foundation of her deceitful world. Tomorrow, I told myself as sleep finally claimed me. Tomorrow the rail hunt begins. You know, the sound of the front door opening has never filled me with such dread as it did that day. Ellen was back, earlier than expected. My heart was racing, a mix of anticipation and raw, seething anger as I heard her footsteps in the hall. This was the moment, wasn't it? The showdown I'd been losing sleep over. "Jason?" Her voice, that familiar, cheerful tone, floated up the stairs. It struck a nerve. How could she sound so normal, so blissfully unaware of the storm she was walking into? "In here," I called out, my voice steady, masking the turmoil inside. I was in our bedroom, the scene of so many shared moments, now just a backdrop for confrontation. She appeared at the door, her suitcase in hand, a smile on her face that faltered when she saw my expression. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have," I said, my words cold, measured. "Or maybe I just realized I've been living with one." Her smile dropped, confusion spreading across her face. "Jason, what are you talking about? I've just come back from a trip and—" "A trip?" I cut her off, stepping closer, my heart pounding in my chest. Or should we call it what it really was? An escape? A betrayal? Her eyes widened, a hint of fear flickering in them. I don't understand where this is coming from. I was working, Jason. Working? I scoffed, the sound bitter. Is that what we're calling it now? Tell me, Ellen, how does working involve cozying up in bars, laughing it up with strangers? How does it involve lying about where you are? She backed up a step, her suitcase thudding to the floor. Jason, please. You're scaring me. I was in Houston. You weren't in Houston yesterday. I snapped, the accusation sharp between us. The hotel confirmed you checked out early. I saw you, Ellen. Here, in town. That's not possible. She started, but her voice trailed off as she saw the determination in my face. Stop lying. My voice rose, a shout that filled the room, echoing off the walls. I'm tired of the lies. I know about the bar. I know about the other men. What I don't know is why. Why would you do this to us? Her face crumpled, the first tear slipping down her cheek. Jason, I can explain. I don't want your explanations, I interrupted, my voice breaking with the weight of my anger and hurt. I want the truth. For once in our marriage, the honest truth. She wiped her face, taking a deep breath. It's not what you think. I was meeting an old friend. It was innocent. Innocent? I laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. Do you think I'm a fool? I saw you, Ellen. With my own eyes. And the things I've heard, whatever you think you saw, it wasn't me, she insisted, her voice rising to match mine. Jason, please, we need to talk about this. I love you. I would never do anything to hurt you. Love? I questioned, the word tasting sour. Is that what you call it? You have a funny way of showing it, Ellen. She moved towards me, reaching out, but I stepped back, my gesture stopping her cold. Don't, I said simply, the single word a barrier she couldn't cross. I'm going to stay with my sister tonight, she said after a moment, her voice quiet, defeated. Please, let's try to talk when you're calm. I can explain everything. Watching her pick up her suitcase and walk out was like watching the last 10 years of our life together leave with her. In that moment, I felt a strange relief mixed with a deep, aching emptiness. The front door closed with a soft click, and I was alone. Alone with my thoughts, my doubts, and the shards of a marriage I no longer understood. Was she telling the truth? Had I made a terrible mistake? No, the evidence was too strong, my convictions too firm. Tomorrow, I'd start digging again. Because if Ellen wouldn't give me the truth, I'd find it myself. No matter how deep I had to go, no matter what it cost me. You ever feel like the floor's been yanked from under you? That's how I felt the morning after Ellen left to stay at her sister's. The house was quiet, too quiet, and every corner seemed to whisper her name. But along with the silence, there was a clarity that had been absent before. Today, I'd get my answers, no more playing around. The stakes were too high, and frankly, my patience had worn too thin. I started by pulling up all the credit card statements and phone records. Numbers don't lie, not like people. The records painted a picture, a timeline of deceit. There were charges in places she should never have been, texts and calls at hours that didn't make any sense. It was all there in black and white, undeniable and cold. I needed more, though, something concrete to confront her with, something she couldn't explain away with sweet words or tears. I called a buddy of mine, a private investigator. It felt like a betrayal, hiring someone to spy on my wife, but what choice did I have? He promised to be discreet, to get me what I needed without causing a stir. Give me a couple of days, he said. I agreed, the weight of the weight heavy on my shoulders. Those days were long. I moved through them like a ghost, my actions automatic. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. Ellen tried to call, her texts popping up on my phone with pleading words. Let's talk, she said. Please, Jason, we can fix this. I didn't respond. What was there to say? Every word from her now felt like a potential trap. Then, the PI called. "I have something you need to see," he said, his voice grim. We met in a dimly lit coffee shop, the kind of place where conversations go to stay hidden. He slid a manila envelope across the table to me. "Photos and a few recordings. I think this will give you what you need." The photos were damning. Ellen, not in Houston, not working, but in some dive bar I'd never seen, cozying up to a man I definitely didn't know. My heart raced as I flipped through them, each snapshot a betrayal. And then the recordings. Conversations that twisted the knife deeper, her laughter mingling with his, her promises, not to me but to him. I felt sick, my hands shaking as I put the photos back into the envelope. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice hollow. The PI nodded, understanding perhaps, and left me there with my shattered illusions. I drove home in a daze, the evidence burning a hole in the passenger seat next to me. The house, once a place of love and warmth, now felt like a cold, empty shell. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope in front of me, and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of the hurt. It was overwhelming, a tidal wave of pain and anger. When Ellen walked through the door later that evening, her face hopeful, I was ready. I didn't shout or scream. I simply laid the envelope on the table between us. "Explain this," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Her face went pale as she looked at the photos, her eyes widening with fear. "Jason, she started, but her voice broke. "No more lies, Ellen," I interrupted, my words sharp as blades. "Just the truth. All of it." And she told me. Everything. About the loneliness, the disconnect, how she'd found solace in someone else's arms. She talked, and I listened, the words like poison filling the room. When she finished, the silence hung heavy between us. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you." "Sorry," I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. I looked at her, really looked, and saw not just my wife but a stranger. "I need time," I said finally, standing up. "You should go." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and gathered her things. Watching her leave, I felt a mix of relief and profound sadness. The truth was out, but the cost was higher than I'd ever imagined. Now, with the house truly empty, I sat back down at the table, the silence a companion as bitter as my thoughts. What came next? I didn't know. All I knew was that the road ahead was one I'd have to walk alone. There's a certain silence that fills a house after a storm like that, a deep, resounding stillness that echoes through each room, marking the absence of someone who used to be an integral part of your life. That was the silence I woke up to the day after Ellen left for the last time. Sitting alone at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in my hands no longer brought comfort. It was just bitter, like the memories swirling in my mind. How do you reconcile years of love with the reality of betrayal? You don't, I guess. You just live with the jagged pieces. The phone was quiet, too. No more messages from Ellen, no attempts at reconciliation. Maybe she had finally realized the damage was too deep, or perhaps she was just giving me the space I had asked for. Either way, the silence was a relief, yet it screamed in my ears. I had decisions to make, big ones. The house felt too big, too empty. Staying here wasn't going to work. Every corner, every piece of furniture, every framed photograph was a reminder of what had been and would never be again. I started packing up, not quite sure where I was going, but certain I couldn't stay. The moving boxes were a testament to the finality of it all. Each item I packed felt like I was putting away parts of my past, sealing away the years of trust and companionship alongside books and knickknacks. It was during these moments, hands busy but mind painfully clear, that I plotted my next steps. I wasn't just going to disappear, to slink away and lick my wounds in solitude. No, Ellen had to understand the full extent of the consequences of her actions. Legal advice was my next step. Sitting down with a lawyer, I laid out everything: the affair, the lies, the emotional fallout. What are my options? I asked, my voice steady, belying the turmoil inside. Divorce was inevitable, the lawyer confirmed, his voice impersonal, professional. You'll want to consider how to approach the division of assets, potential alimony, perhaps even a case for emotional distress, he suggested, tapping a pen against his notepad. Emotional distress seemed about right. I nodded, my mind already racing ahead. Let's proceed with that, I decided, the words tasting like ash but necessary. It wasn't just about ending the marriage. It was about reclaiming some sense of justice, of not walking away as just another victim of infidelity. Days turned into weeks. The divorce proceedings were messy, not that I had expected anything less. Ellen was cooperative but distant, her lawyers doing most of the talking. We saw each other a few times, across a mediation table, exchanging not words but paperwork. It was clinical, each signature a step further away from the life we had built. The house sold quickly. I watched as another couple walked through the door, their faces bright with anticipation, unknowing of the shadows that had once filled those rooms. I handed over the keys with a sense of relief, feeling lighter somehow. With everything wrapped up, a new sense of emptiness settled in. Where do you go when the home you built no longer exists? I wasn't sure. I rented a small apartment, nothing like the house Ellen and I shared. It was new, unmarked by memories, a blank slate. Perhaps that was what I needed, a place to start over, to redefine who I was without her. The final divorce papers arrived, a thick envelope that sat unopened on my counter for days before I had the courage to tear it open. It was done. Officially. The relief was expected, but the wave of sorrow that followed caught me off guard. It was over. Really over. In the quiet of my new apartment, with the night pressing against the windows, I allowed myself to feel it all: the anger, the betrayal, the loss, and beneath that, the faintest glimmer of freedom. Tomorrow, I told myself, I would start new. New routines, new hopes, maybe even a new version of me, one not weighed down by the past. And so, as I turned off the lights and headed to bed in this unfamiliar place that was slowly becoming mine, I realized something important. Life goes on, not always as we plan, not always as we hope, but it goes on. And so would I.